So let's get into the meat of the episode, right? Let's talk about the pros and cons of living in Annapolis, Maryland. What I want to do, being that I'm local here to the market, is feature a city every day, every week on this podcast, or as often as we drop them. I'm just being realistic to myself. Once the market starts to pick up, episodes may drop a lot slower. So what I intend on doing is, in this slow period, I'm kind of binge stacking and just recording a lot of content. So some of this stuff may be released later than it's actually being recorded. Whatever is timely as far as has to do with the market updates, I'll try to release those earlier, but the entire episode where I talk about pros and cons of moving to a city, or just things about a city, about real estate in general, those I can kind of drop at a later date, because I know in the spring, hopefully the market is going to be a lot busier, a lot of open houses, showings, and so on and so forth, right? But let's get into it. We're going to talk about Annapolis, Maryland. I was trying to list pros and cons, just things I could think of. I was trying to come up with 10 of each. I was able to come up with 9 pros and 8 negative reasons as far as living or moving to Annapolis, Maryland, right? Number 1 I got here is historic, right? So if you're into history, you like an old historic city, Annapolis is that. As far as the city of Annapolis, the Main Street area where the Capitol building is, close to the wharf, all of that, I mean the docks, all of that is beautiful, right? And very historic in the way it looks. I'll probably link down in the description below. Yeah, so as I was mentioning, if you're talking about historic, Annapolis is the place. Kind of like some areas in Washington, D.C., for instance, some buildings are protected by the Lakefront Trust. So I'm going to veer off a little bit, but I just want to give you guys an example. Excuse me. So for instance, in Washington, D.C., some of the structures of the building are very old, and an owner may go sign up their house for a trust. So let's say you own a house, you can go to the Lakefront Trust and say, I want my house to be part of the historic archaeological preservation of the city, something along those lines. And then they're going to include your house into the trust. And that puts an easement on the house, meaning a new buyer, if I want to buy that house, I automatically am signed into the easement without me, even if I don't want to conserve, be part of any conservation, or I want to remodel the house as far as the front aesthetics of the house, I can't do it if the previous owner signed into that trust saying they want to keep that building historic, right? So Annapolis, as far as the city, has a lot of those historic kind of buildings, and I'm pretty sure there has to be some kind of stipulations, sort of like DC, that's keeping that area as far as the docks and the Capitol building, the Main Street area. Historic Main Street is what it's called, or what it's known as. There has to be some stipulations keeping that area that way. So it's a very historic city. Also, number 2, I would say the waterfront. It's a coastal city, known as the sailing capital of America. You go down there in the summertime, you'll see probably 1,000 or more sailboats leaving the docks and coming in. So if you like water, you like sailing, Annapolis is the place for you. Number 3, I would say, well, let me dive in a little deeper with the waterfront. Just so many areas. It's not only the docks, right? You got to know by the Sandy Point area, the whole city is kind of like connected to the Chesapeake Bay, and just on the border, it's really border with the Atlantic Ocean. So it just goes, all those rivers and everything just kind of flow all the way through to the Atlantic Ocean, right? So it's a great waterfront community. With that being said, leads us into number 3, great schools. The school districts technically in Annapolis tend to perform higher than the Maryland average, right? So as far as the grades, the testing, when you think about average SAT scores, things of that nature, Annapolis just tends to perform a little better than the rest of the school districts in Maryland and somewhat nationally as well. It's in the top school districts in Maryland. So that's for families. If you got kids and you want them to have a good education, that can be an area you want to go. Number 4, we'll talk about the culture. As I mentioned, the historic area. Another thing is it has a lot of state parks. One of the biggest monuments for the state of Maryland is the Chesapeake Bay Bridge. That is right in that Annapolis area. Actually, some of the license plates for Maryland has that Bay Bridge on there. I know there are different things that they normally have on the license plates, but one of the issues of those license plates actually had the Chesapeake Bay Bridge there. And you got so many state parks in Annapolis. Great outdoors, you know, if you like walking through parks, jogging, hiking, sightseeing, Annapolis is excellent for you. Number 5, we're going to talk about the cuisine, right? Excellent cuisine. Obviously, it's by the water, so a whole lot of seafood and nice restaurants, affluent, just fine dining restaurants. You also have some of the simple stuff, like if you go, you got to know the right neighborhoods, right? But for instance, when was this? Maybe on Monday of last week, I was stopping by one of my showings my listings in Annapolis, and I saw a sign at the entrance of the community. But when I drove in, it was for a food truck that pulled into the community and was selling to neighbors, and they were coming out and buying. So you also have these food trucks that got good tacos and just different cuisines, and also nice pizzerias and stuff like that. So the food and the dining in Annapolis is excellent. Number 6, we'll talk about that small town feel. For instance, even what I just mentioned, the taco food truck pulling into a neighborhood, and neighbors kind of know the salesperson already, to where they were coming outside to go patronize that person. It gives it that a small town / family vibe. You kind of know each other. Even though it's the capital of Maryland, you know, somehow some cities just got that big city vibe to where everybody is hustling and bustling. You don't get that feeling in Annapolis. Not to say it's not busy, because we're going to get to that, but it just gives you that small town vibe to where you got pockets of communities and neighborhoods to where you may know your neighbors and you may kind of build a bond, right? Number 7, I would say a patriotic feel, right? That depends on who you are, because you know how polarizing things are now. But I'll just say Annapolis is a historic city. So if you are into American history, you know there's so much. As I mentioned, the Annapolis docks, very historic. Was actually a slave port at one point. Used to receive slaves. So there's that factor of the history there. Then you got a World War II memorial there in Annapolis for the state of Maryland. You also have the Navy, actually not the Navy Yard, but the Naval Academy is right there. So you'll see a lot of sailors walking around. You know, the World War II memorial is over there. And it gives you that patriotic feel as far as, you know, loving the country and things of that nature. So if that's your thing, that would be a good area to live. And also you'll see the capital of Maryland, the Capitol Hall, right? The Capitol building with the flag flying, and just, you know, once you drive down around the Capitol building, you'll see the Maryland flag and the American flag, and you see sailors walking around. So if you are into that kind of vibe, you're a veteran, or you just love America, then that would be a nice city for you. It gives you a strong connection to that, right? Number 8, I would say, is the economy. You know, whenever the recession was, I think it was 2008, living here in Maryland, we didn't really feel the recession too hard, because one thing that kept functioning through the recession was the government, right? So Annapolis, Maryland is technically a suburb of Washington, D.C. It's not too far from Washington, D.C. Actually, the capital of America was in Annapolis at one point, maybe for a year, right before they moved it to Washington, D.C. So it's not too far. It's kind of in between Baltimore and Washington, D.C., you know, so close to both, not as big of a city as them, but that helps with the economy economy, right? You may have people who work in DC and live in Annapolis. And also, as I mentioned, the Capitol building, or it being the capital of Maryland, a lot of state government bodies have offices, for example, the governor and all of these things, and a lot of offices that facilitate the Maryland government and keeps it running are kind of based in Annapolis. So when things like that happen, it kind of trickles down to the surrounding communities. The average household income in Annapolis is $92,026, which is way higher than the average household income of America, which is somewhere around 64,000, I believe. So not a bad place to live. And finally, number 9. This I thought was going to be a con, because a few years ago, Annapolis's crime rate was a little bit higher than the national crime rate, which was surprising to me, because just being familiar with it, it didn't come across as such. But maybe just because it's a big city, it's affluent as well, then you got disparities in income. But based on the crime rate, as we know what's been going on all across the country, crime rates have kind of skyrocketed. So Annapolis actually fall way lower than the national average. As far as violent crime, it's at a 5.68, and this is per 1,000 residents. So that's quite low. The national average is at a 9.8 per 1,000 residents. You know, total violent crime was at 221. Property crime was higher at 792. Obviously, a lot of probably nice cars, a lot of good businesses, and also nice homes. So more property crimes, which is 19.48 per 1,000, but this is still lower than the national average, so that's actually a good thing. As far as the crime rate is way lower than the national average. As far as this year, previous years was not always so, but it's always fairly decent, right? All right, so hopefully that helped. Those were the pros, and let's talk about, well, let's just summarize. Historic waterfront, great schools, great culture, excellent cuisine, small town feel, patriotic feel, get a patriotic feel, and strong local economy, right? If you are, and definitely the crime rate is lower than the national average. So if you're thinking about moving to Annapolis, Maryland, there you have it. Let's see the cons, the negative reasons as to why you may not want to move or living in Annapolis, Maryland. Some of the negatives. First thing that came to mind for me was traffic, right? Because I was just there, as I mentioned, going to one of my listings, and thankfully for me, my side of the street wasn't where the traffic was, you know. But I couldn't help but notice the other side of the street. Let's say I was going this way and the traffic was coming in the opposite direction. Over on that side, it was bumper to bumper traffic. And I was just thankful that, wow, I'm glad I'm not stuck in that. Like, it wasn't moving an inch. So Annapolis can get like that, especially Route 50, even down Main Street and all of that. It can get heavy traffic. But Route 50 can actually shut down, and I'm talking about bumper to bumper, not moving at all. And even on a Sunday when you think it's the weekend, it'd be nice. No, for some reason, Route 50 runs right into the Chesapeake Bay Bridge, right? Especially in the summertime, people go down to the Sandy Point Park, and whether it's the traffic going there or people just trying to go to one of these waterfronts to get their boat on the water, you know, accessing the water through those parks and stuff, it's just always congested. Or people just taking their family to go grill and just sit by the Bay Bridge. It's always congested. Chesapeake Bay Bridge. Traffic is a nightmare. When it moves, but when I wouldn't say it's bad all the time, but it gets bad. And when it gets bad, it really gets bad. You get stuck in one of those Annapolis traffics, you're gonna be sitting for a while. But for the most part, it kind of moves, right? It's not always, but when it happens, you're stuck. All right. Number 2, cost of living. As I mentioned, the average average household income is at $92,000. The average home price in Annapolis was somewhere around $600,000, right? So the cost of living, it's not easy. You got to pay to play. In order to live in Annapolis, you got to have some kind of money. Well, you're going to have areas where you can kind of get in where you fit in, but for the most part, it's expensive, right? You know, you got obviously maybe a few homes priced at 300 grand, but then you got $1 million homes, right? So that average now is somewhere in the mid to high 600s. So cost of living is super expensive over there. The taxes are going to hit you as well. One, because of the waterfront, just a lot of things trying to keep the district historic, or keep the city just functioning the way it is. Taxes are high in Annapolis. Don't know what to tell you, no way around that. It is what it is, right? Number six, I would say, is that 6 or 5? Well, that's 5. So number 5, I would say it's flood prone, right? Because of the waterfront, it's a coastal city, you know? So barring, well, you get rare hurricanes. It's nowhere close to Florida, but every now and then, I remember the last one that hit up here. I think, was it Elizabeth, I believe, or Irene? I'm not too sure. But anything coming up the coast, you're going to get flood alerts, right? Just what comes with living on the water, right? So just keep that in mind. If you're going to live on the water, you're going to deal with these issues, right? Annapolis is no different. Number 6, I would say the humidity, but that's a Maryland thing. It's not an Annapolis thing. It's just Maryland gets very humid in the summer. So if you're thinking about moving, if you're already in Maryland, it doesn't really matter, right? But if you're thinking about moving, Maryland gets very humid to where the air is just stuffy, you know? It just is what it is. Number 8, a downside to living in Annapolis, the public transportation is not super great. If you're just talking about the city of Annapolis, you can move around. There's a bus system that runs through the locale. However, it's kind of restricted, right? It doesn't connect with other cities in the area, and there's no metro rail like let's say Washington DC or Northern Virginia. Because if you're in this area, you know, the Metro Rail connects Washington, D.C., Maryland, and Northern Virginia. The same train line runs through all of that, right? Annapolis is kind of left out. So might be a good thing. It keeps certain people out, but it might be redlining technically, right? Depending on how you look at it. So that's a negative. You may want to be driving if you're going to live in that area. All right.